Lydia Harper lived a quiet life at the edge of the great city. She had no wish for riches or power. Her world was filled with dusty scrolls, old books, and worn records. She worked each day in the library, a place no one cared about much except for her. She felt at peace there, reading about things that had long been forgotten by the powerful. The hum of voices in the street never reached her with much force. She liked it that way. One evening, she was closing the old wooden doors of the library when a sound of heavy steps came near. She saw soldiers in fine armor, shining in the dim light. They had been sent from the palace itself, and they had come for her. The leader, a tall man with a sharp face, held out a paper. On it was the seal of Queen Alara, the most powerful woman in the world. He spoke no warm words, only told her that she was to come, right then and right there. Lydia's heart raced. She had never even seen the palace, let alone been summoned to enter. Her mind filled with questions, but the soldiers answered none. The journey through the city was quiet. People stepped aside as the soldiers passed, whispering among themselves about who this simple woman was and what crime she may have done. Lydia sat in silence within the carriage, watching the lights of the city blur past. The soldiers kept their eyes forward, never looking at her. She pressed her hands tightly in her lap to keep them from shaking. She was no one important. The queen had never heard her name before, she thought. All she could do was wait for what would come. When they reached the palace, Lydia felt swallowed by its size. Towers rose high into the night sky. Walls stretched out longer than her sight could follow. She had read about it in books, but no words had done justice to its vastness. The great gates opened with a thunderous sound, and the carriage rolled inside. Guards lined both sides, their eyes shining like polished glass, unblinking, sharp. Lydia felt smaller than ever. Soon she was led inside through echoing halls. Every wall was covered with art, gold, and rich stone. The soldiers said nothing. Soon she was brought before the throne chamber. Lydia stepped carefully across the marble floor. There, on a raised seat at the far end of the vast room, sat Queen Alara. Her gown shone under the light, her crown glittered, and her face was calm but cold. She was the woman who ruled over countless lands, the woman who decided the fate of thousands. And now her eyes rested on Lydia. "Lydia Harper," the queen said softly, though her voice carried across the whole chamber. Lydia bowed low, her nerves shaking through every inch of her. She did not answer. She could not. She feared her voice would break into pieces. The queen gave a sign and a side door opened. A boy was led into the chamber. He looked no older than 6 or 7. His steps were slow, as if each one carried weight far too heavy for him. The court watched with silent interest. Whispers had gone around for years that this boy was the queen's child, hidden away from the eyes of her people. Some said the child was broken. Some said cursed. He never spoke, never even looked at those around him for more than a moment. Lydia's eyes softened as she watched him. There was nothing of a curse about him, only sadness and the ache of being misunderstood. She had seen that same sadness in children left at the library doors, children who had no parents to take them home. She felt a sudden ache deep in her own chest. She wanted to go to him, to kneel down and smile, to show him he had nothing to fear. But she did not move. The child stared at her for a long time. For a moment, it seemed time had stopped. Then the boy spoke. The sound was small, but it shook the air like thunder. He said only one thing, 3 simple words that none had ever heard from him before. He looked directly at Lydia and called her Mother, Human. The entire chamber fell silent. Guards stiffened. Ministers rose from their chairs in shock. Even the queen's calm face faded for the first time in years. Her eyes widened, her lips parted, but no sound came out. She, the queen of all lands, known for strength, wisdom, and power, was struck still. Lydia's heart leapt into her throat. She had no idea what had just happened or why, but she knew that in that single word, her quiet life had ended. Nothing would ever be the same again. The silence in the throne room seemed to last forever. All eyes stayed fixed on the child who had spoken and on Lydia Harper, who stood at the center of the floor. The boy kept his gaze locked on her, a small pair of hands gripping the folds of his robe. She did not breathe, unsure if she had dreamed the words that had left his lips. But she could not have imagined it. She had heard it, and so had everyone else. Queen Alara slowly rose from her throne. The golden light in the chamber shimmered against her crown as she stepped forward. Her eyes shifted from her son to Lydia, then back again, as though she struggled to believe what she had witnessed. The court murmured in confusion. Some covered their mouths. Others whispered rapidly, trying to decide what this meant. The queen raised one hand, and the voices stopped at once. No one dared speak again. Her gaze stayed locked on Lydia. "Why does my son call you mother?" Alara said, her tone calm but filled with tension. Lydia shook her head gently. She took a step forward, her voice low but steady. "Your Majesty, I do not know. I have never met him before today." Whispers surged again, but were cut off swiftly by a sharp glance from the queen. Jacob Price, commander of the palace guard, stepped forward. His tall figure cast a long shadow across the floor, and his eyes narrowed at Lydia as though she were a criminal. "This woman has bewitched the boy," Jacob declared. His voice carried with authority. "It cannot be accident that he speaks to her. She has done something to earn his words." Samuel Carter, the chief advisor, shifted in his seat with a sly smile. He had long known how to twist words into traps. Or perhaps, he said softly, she has been sent here with purpose. No stranger walks through life only to have fortune tie itself around her throat. It is too dangerous to trust coincidence. The queen did not respond to them at once. Instead, she moved closer to her son, kneeling to meet his eyes. For the first time in the memory of many, the queen seemed uncertain. She reached out a hand to touch the boy's arm. "My child," she said with rare gentleness, "who is this woman to you?" The boy did not answer the queen. He only pressed tighter against Lydia with his gaze, silent but firm. Then, in a quiet voice, he repeated, "Mother." Gasps spread across the chamber. Some dropped to their knees out of fear. Others looked at Lydia like she was something far beyond human. Lydia herself felt weak in her knees, yet she knew she could not collapse here. She could give no sign of guilt, or fear, or even triumph. Instead, she bent down, placing her hand near her heart. "I am only Lydia Harper," she said. "I never asked for this. I never wanted to stand in such a place. But it seems your son believes something I do not yet understand. I can only promise that whatever part I play, I mean no harm to you or to him." Her words were plain. They were not polished like those of ministers or wrapped in clever lines like Samuel's speeches, but there was honesty in them, and it showed. The queen rose slowly, her tall form towering once more. She studied Lydia in silence, her expression unreadable. Then she turned to her counsel. "The boy has chosen to speak," she said. "When he could not speak for anyone before, that alone is no curse, no trick, no accident. While I breathe, Lydia Harper will stay here." The chamber filled with shock. Jacob's jaw tightened, but he bowed, hiding his anger. Samuel lowered his eyes, whispering to himself, his mind already building plans. 2 guards stepped forward to guide Lydia away. But the queen raised her hand again. "Not as prisoner," she ordered, "as guest." The boy reached out suddenly and took Lydia's hand. His small fingers clung tightly as if he feared she would vanish. The queen watched this with eyes that softened only a little. She was not used to feeling vulnerable, yet this moment forced her to face it. As Lydia was led away with the child at her side, the eyes of the entire court followed. Some were filled with fear, others with anger, but none could deny this simple truth. Something had now begun, and it had begun because of her. At night, Lydia was given a chamber in the palace. It was wide and rich compared to her small library room, but she hardly saw any of it. She sat with the child beside her, trying to speak softly, telling him ordinary stories about meadows, rivers, and stars. He listened without interruption, eyes bright but quiet, as if he had found the place he had belonged to all along. For Lydia, the question still burned in her mind. Why her? Why had this child, with all the world around him, chosen her above all? She did not yet know. But the answer, she felt deep in her chest, was going to change more than her own life. It was going to shape the fate of all. The first days in the palace felt like walking on ground that might break at any step. Lydia Harper moved through long hallways of white stone lined with gold, always watched by soldiers who said nothing. Servants bowed to her but whispered as she passed. Some saw honor in her presence, while others saw great danger. She had not chosen any of this, yet the weight of the queen's court now hung on her shoulders. The child stayed close to Lydia everywhere she went. At meals he sat beside her. When she walked through the gardens, he held tightly to her hand. At night he would curl near her chair, listening as she read soft lines from the old books she loved. He never left her side, and though he spoke little, his eyes showed comfort and trust whenever he looked at her. The queen visited often and always stood in silence for a while before speaking. She had spent years waiting for her son to show a spark of life, and now it had lit for this ordinary woman. She did not understand it, yet she could not deny it. Lydia spoke to the queen with respect, but her words were simple, her voice without fear. That alone made her different from the men of the court. Jacob Price could not hide his anger. He did not believe in the bond Lydia shared with the boy. To him it was a trick, one that made the throne weak. He said more than once that it was a danger to the order of the realm. Samuel Carter was quieter, smiled when others did not smile. His words dripped with smoothness, yet his eyes sharpened whenever Lydia entered the chamber. He watched her like a man who studied a puzzle. Lydia often caught his gaze and felt coldness coil in her stomach. One evening, Lydia was taken before the court again. The queen wished to know how her son spent his hours. Ministers and nobles filled the hall, curious but suspicious. Lydia spoke honestly, telling them how the boy sat with her and listened. How sometimes he pointed at the stars in the garden and whispered their names. How he wanted to hear about rivers and farms and families. People in the court shifted in disbelief. They had never heard the boy say anything much more than a single word. "It cannot be true," Jacob argued. His voice grew loud, echoing in the marble chamber. "If the boy speaks, let him show the court now. Let us all hear." The queen raised her hand and ordered the child to step forward. The boy looked at Lydia instead, a faint fear showing in his eyes. Lydia bent low and touched his hand gently. "It is all right," she said softly. "So only say what is in your heart." The child turned to the queen and whispered words so quiet that several leaned forward to hear. "I do not want to be alone." The chamber stilled as though the air had been stolen from it. These were the clearest words he had ever spoken in the presence of all. The queen's lips parted with wonder. Lydia felt her chest ache because she knew what that little voice carried. Loneliness. The simple truth of a child who had been seen as strange and broken. Samuel lowered his head to hide his smile. "It seems," he said, "that this woman has power over him that none of us hold. Perhaps it is not dangerous, but perhaps it will become so." The queen shot him a sharp look, but she could not deny there was some truth. Lydia, however, said nothing in return.
Ouch.
She only stood close while the boy reached for her hand again. Power was not what she had. What she offered was something no laws or crowns could build. That night, Jacob forced a test. He commanded guards to escort Lydia out of the palace walls, claiming it was duty to see whether the boy's trust remained in her absence. Against her will, she was led away. But no sooner had Lydia stepped beyond the gates than a sharp cry echoed across stone halls. The boy had run wildly through corridors, calling for her, for the mother he had chosen. The palace filled with panic. The queen herself rushed down from her chamber to find her child clinging to Lydia outside the gates. His small body shook as he buried his face against her. The queen saw then what the court had not yet accepted. This woman's bond with her son was real. She looked at Jacob with fury in her eyes. He bowed low, hiding his defeat. Samuel, meanwhile, observed from a distance, his face calm, though something dark stirred behind his thoughts. As Lydia carried the tired boy back inside, she thought about her life in the library, a quiet life that was over now. She did not know how long she could endure the suspicion of the court. Yet each time the boy's small hand gripped hers, she felt she could bear it. For he had chosen her, and that choice would not be broken so easily. Life in the palace grew harder for Lydia Harper. Each day she felt the eyes of the council watching her, waiting for her to make one wrong step. Jacob Price kept drilling the soldiers, speaking loudly in meetings about loyalty and strength, hinting that Lydia weakened the throne. Samuel Carter kept his sly smile, speaking softly in corners, always listening, always weaving words in ways that made Lydia uneasy. Yet no matter what anyone said, the child stayed with her. His small hand found hers each morning, and he followed her patiently through the gardens or into the library within the palace. He hardly let go of her, as if letting go would make her vanish. The queen watched this silently. She still showed no softness to the court, but her eyes always grew warm on her son, especially when Lydia was near. The council grew restless. Important men called for trials to test Lydia and see what kind of woman she truly was. One morning the queen gave her order. Lydia was to travel beyond the palace walls into a troubled province. Rumors had spread there about unrest and angry voices rising against the throne. Jacob claimed it would prove if Lydia had courage. Samuel added calmly that truth was best seen not in words, but in actions. Lydia accepted, though her heart trembled. She did not want danger, but she also could not step away when the queen's eyes rested on her with hope. The boy cried when he was told he could not go. His voice broke the hearts of many servants, though the councilman stood stern. Lydia knelt to him, brushing back his dark hair. "I will return," she promised. "I'll not leave you. You must trust me until I come back." Though tears ran down his cheeks, he nodded slowly, believing her words. The journey carried Lydia through long paths strewn with dust and shadow. Jacob himself led the soldiers, his tone cold, his eyes watching her with doubt at every turn. Lydia felt no welcome from him, but she walked firmly, never letting him see her nerves. When they reached the troubled village, anger filled the air. People shouted that the queen's taxes were too much, that their voices were never heard. Jacob prepared the soldiers for violence, yet Lydia asked him to wait. She walked alone into the center of the crowd. Her voice was steady as she called to the people. She did not promise gold or power. She only told them simple truths. She spoke of her own life, of books and forgotten voices, of the value hidden in every person. She spoke of a child who had been silenced, who now spoke at last because someone listened with a true heart. Her words did not thunder like a commander's, but they carried weight because they were spoken with honesty. The crowd quieted. Some lowered their arms. An old man stepped forward and asked who she was. She said only, "I am Lydia Harper. Nothing more, nothing less. But I came here with ears to listen, not with a sword to strike." By nightfall, the shouting stopped. Where Jacob would have answered with blades, Lydia answered with patience. The village gave food freely, and people walked beside her with respect that could not be forced. Jacob said little, though his jaw tightened with each step. On their return to the palace, the story traveled faster than the soldiers. Servants whispered, ministers raised their brows, and when the boy saw Lydia pass through the gates again, he ran to her with joy brighter than any jewel. He clung to her side, speaking softly so that all around could hear. Mother kept her word. The queen's gaze swept over the hall. Even the proud men who doubted Lydia could not argue with the proof before them. Samuel, ever quiet, tilted his head as though he had expected this all along. A faint smile touched his lips, but his eyes carried plans no one else could read. That night the queen walked with Lydia in the hidden garden behind the palace. Dark flowers shimmered under the moon. The queen's strong voice seemed softer now. "You did what even trained commanders could not. People trust you as they do not trust us. My son trusts you most of all." Lydia lowered her head humbly. She had no desire for crowns or for control, but she felt the truth of the queen's words. Something larger than herself had begun, and it was not stopping. The queen paused and said in a whisper, meant only for Lydia, "What you carry is greater than power. Do not lose it." I think even I am learning what I once forgot. And for the first time since stepping into the palace, Lydia saw not the ruler of countless lands, but a mother reaching for something she had long missed. The palace grew uneasy in the days that followed Lydia's return. Everywhere she walked, voices whispered behind her back. Some called her a blessing. Others called her a danger that would break the throne. What no one could ignore was the change. The queen's son now spoke more each day. His words were not long, but they were real. He called for Lydia when he woke, and he rested only after her quiet stories. The halls that once echoed with silence now held the voice of a child at last. The queen knew this was a miracle. The court did not. Jacob Price hardened his drills with the guards, speaking of loyalty and strength in louder tones than ever. He believed power must stay in the hand of soldiers, not in the hands of one quiet, ordinary woman. To him, Lydia was a threat that could not be trusted. Samuel Carter, calm and sharp, waited for his chance. He saw that Lydia held not titles or crowns, but something more dangerous. She held the hearts of people. Servants smiled when she spoke to them. Messengers carried stories of villages that welcomed her instead of fearing the queen's soldiers.
Ow.
Samuel knew that hearts could topple thrones more quickly than blades. The deciding moment came in the great chamber when the council met once again. The queen sat on her throne, her son beside her, his hand resting in Lydia's. The court was full. Soldiers lined the walls. Ministers filled the benches. Everyone knew that something final was coming. Jacob was the first to speak. His voice rang through the room like iron striking stone. "Your Majesty, this woman weakens the crown. She is not of noble blood. She is no leader, no warrior. She stays, she places cracks in your throne. Today I say we must cast her out before her shadow grows larger." Samuel rose after him, his voice calm but cutting. "I agree, she holds no crown and no title, yet she holds something more. If we allow her to stay, her hold will spread. Soon it will not be the queen they follow, but Lydia Harper, the woman they call mother. And when the people look to her instead of to their queen, what will remain? An empire without loyalty." The court stirred. The words carried weight, and the danger was clear. The queen sat silent, her eyes heavy with thought. All waited for her to speak. It was then the boy rose from his seat. His small figure seemed frail, yet his voice reached across the chamber. "You all speak as though she is nothing, but you are wrong. She is the reason I can speak at all. She is the reason my heart does not ache each night. She is not a curse. She is the gift I needed." Gasps spread through the room. It was the longest speech he had ever given. Lydia felt her throat tighten. She had never wished to be more than herself, but his words struck deeper than anything she could have said. The boy turned to the queen. "You are my mother by birth. She is my mother by heart. Why must this room choose between them? Can we not see both truths?" The hall shook with quiet murmurs. Some bowed their heads, unable to argue with a child's simple honesty. Others clenched their fists, too proud to admit defeat. Jacob stood frozen, his argument swallowed by the boy's words. Samuel lowered his head at last, his sharp eyes dulled, knowing he had not planned for innocence stronger than any clever phrase. The queen rose. For once her voice was not distant but warm. "My son has spoken truth. This woman has not stolen power. She has reminded us what power truly is. It is not iron or gold. It is the hand that reaches out when all others turn away. It is the heart that listens when silence has long been kept. Lydia Harper stands here not as a threat, but as a guardian. And I, Alara, queen of these lands, will honor her as one." No one dared argue, not even Jacob, not even Samuel. The boy pressed himself into Lydia's side, whispering again, "Mother, human." And this time the queen did not frown at the words. Instead, she drew closer and placed her hand over Lydia's. For the first time since taking the throne, she looked not only like a ruler, but also like a mother. The chamber filled with silence, then slowly, with the sound of respect. Some bent their knees, not to the sword nor to the crown, but to the truth that had been revealed. Lydia Harper, once a simple historian who lived among books and dust, now stood at the heart of an empire. She did not seek it, yet it had found her. She was not queen, not soldier, not noble. She was something far older and far stronger. She was human, and that at last was enough to remind the world of what mattered.